Well. Don't mind if we do have a little bit of Mythic Plus changes here on this fine Thursday afternoon. Don't mind if we do. Basically, Blizzard decided to pull the trigger on some changes in regards to Gilded Crests and then just some generic dungeon tuning stuff. And I would describe these changes as surprising but welcomed. First and foremost, as we can see on the screen right here, Gilded Crest now available from +8 level keystones, and the blue post states this: we've heard feedback around challenges in the new keystone affix and scaling structure, as well as the difficulty some players are facing with making progress. With the hot fixes that are now live, Gilded Crests are now being awarded beginning at Mythic Plus Keystone 8. We kind of talked about this recently on the most recent episode of the Bench podcast. I made a video talking about this a little bit as well. I think in general, this is a pretty good change. This doesn't move the myth track of the gearing being anywhere up except for +10, but for a lot of players, the peak, the pinnacle of their Mythic Plus experience is being able to do a 10 one time, right? Just to be able to get a portal. And I've seen actually a decent number of people who believe that they're hard stuck and they can't get enough gear to be able to kind of get over that hump. Now, it's not that you can't do a 10 at 619 item level, because I'm not saying that, because you absolutely can. But it's more just like there are some players who, if you can't outskill it, you typically just outgear it. And there was no gear progression and there was no further progression that they could reasonably make, and they felt hard stuck to the point where I've seen people contemplating quitting the game, which is fine. Like, it makes sense. And I think that whenever you have players that are contemplating quitting the game, that's also like a major red flag for me, because that means that people aren't having fun in Mythic Plus. And I think that Blizzard is going to be looking to start making a change. And I think this Gilded Crest change is great because for a couple of reasons. First off, it allows you to actually be able to upgrade all of your hero track gear to the end of hero track, giving yourself another 6 item level on those pieces of gear. And I think that that's pretty good for a lot of players. On top of that, it also lets you craft gear, and that allows you to be able to get some of those myth track pieces that you otherwise wouldn't be getting. Now, the things that it doesn't let you get, myth track tier, and it doesn't let you get myth track trinkets, because those are going to end up being gated behind the vault. But I think that the Gilded Crest being available at +8, it's a step in the right direction. I think that the Challenger's Peril, and maybe this is a little bit of a spoiler, but I think the Challenger's Peril is something that a lot of average players are really struggling with, but I think that this is going to help those players get to that 10 and be able to allow them to be able to time that 10 to reach that peak, right? That their peak of Mythic Plus, which is getting the portals every single season and like timing the 10 one time. Because not a lot of people are like me in the sense of they don't run a bunch of dungeons every single season. They don't time 10s or fill out 10s in their vault every single week. A lot of people, they do a 10 of a dungeon one time and they don't really do that dungeon on a 10 ever again. Let's talk about some affix and dungeon tuning. So big thing is already, as of recording this, has been pushed live. The duration of the buffs granted by Xal'atath's bargain affixes across the board have been increased to 30 seconds from previously 20. I think that the Xal'atath's bargain affixes have been, in my opinion, actually pretty good. Now, I don't think that all of them are great. I think that Voidbound is not like super sick, but I think in terms of like the Kiss Curse side of it, I actually don't mind the Xal'atath's bargain affixes. Now, I think that that's kind of an unpopular opinion, because I've seen a lot of people just being like, I actually hate affixes. I actually wish they were all gone, even like from the casual player base. But I think that the Xal'atath's bargain affixes are like, honestly, the right level of Kiss Curse for me, where they're not too intrusive most of the time. Now, sometimes they can be kind of annoying, but most of the time they're actually not too intrusive, and the buff that they get is pretty noticeable. Obviously, I think the best one is Ascendant, but I think the buff that we have this week, Devour, I like it. I think it's pretty good, and the buff that you get from it, 20% crit, 10% stamina, that's a lot of stats, guys. Like, being straight up with you guys, that is a lot of stats. The other major change is Xal'atath's Guile now increases enemy health and damage by 10%, was previously 20. And man, this is a big change. I did some keys after this change actually went live, and now I gotta say, I don't think I was a 14 doer prior to the changes happening, but I was a 14 doer after the changes happened. And it gives about a keystone level worth of scaling ease. I think the big thing that the Guile does, and this change to the Guile that it does, that's nice, is that the jump from 11 to 12 was just way too steep, frankly. And it's something that we kind of talked about a lot on, I talked about it in the videos and we talked about it on the podcast and stuff like that. The jump was just way too steep for players. And so yeah, now they've reduced the how difficult it is to actually be able to take that jump from an 11 to a 12. I thought that the HP, funnily enough, from the Guile was more or less fine, even at 20%. It was literally just the damage. And I was even suggesting that the Guile be changed from 0% damage gain and stay 20% HP, but then moving it to 10-10 has made it noticeably easier to be able to do keys to the point where, I timed a 13 Dawnbreaker, I timed a 14 Mists. Yeah, I timed a 13 Dawnbreaker and 14 Mists. Those are the only 2 keys I actually timed after that. But it was a good change. I mean, I'm not going to complain about this. I thought the Guile was too steep. It makes things like, potentially even pugging title more accessible and stuff like that. And I think that this is good. Good change. Let's talk about dungeon tuning. So dungeon tuning doesn't hit until the 15th. It doesn't hit until weekly maintenance for your region. First thing that we have is Necrotic Wake tuning. Again, the things that I would love to see, a Surge and Stitchflesh rework. That's probably the biggest thing that I would be looking to see. Anything other than that, I'm like, kind of whatever on. So let's take a look and see what we actually have. Zul'Ramis Gatekeeper's Wrath of Zul'Ramis periodic damage reduced by 25%. Skeletal Monstrosity's enemy forces contribution increased by 20%. So the Gatekeepers have been a lot more on the menu lately because, they're the most efficient mob in this dungeon. If you go to 3chess.io, let's take a look real quick. If we go to 3chess.io and look at Necrotic Wake, and you look at the efficiency score of the Gatekeeper, it is by far the most efficient mob in this dungeon. More so than like Narzuda, more so than the Skeletal Monstrosity. Like the amount of count that you get relative to the HP that this Gatekeeper has is phenomenal. Additionally, if you're killing it with a Fleshcrafter Cleaver, it's also incredibly good. The downside is that the Wrath of Zul'Ramis AoE was just hitting way too hard. So them hitting it by 25%, I think, is like an acceptable nerf. I think that this is a great nerf. It makes you get punished less for pulling the Gatekeepers just in general. Skeletal Monstrosity enemy force contributions increased by 20%. This is a 20 count mob, so it's going to end up being what, 24 count. So you get 4 additional count. It allows you to be able to path easier through the dungeon. I don't think it changes too much. I think that they've had a lot of people that were accidentally missing count in this dungeon whenever they were holding W because they didn't recognize how many side packs they needed to pull or whatever. And so the Skeletal Monstrosity enemy force contribution being buffed a little bit. That with the Gatekeepers that they've buffed a little bit recently should, if you're holding W through the dungeon, help you get count just a hair easier. Let's get into the big pieces of this. Curing weapons, the effects of Bloody Javelins no longer stack. Insurgent Stitchflesh. Surgeon Stitchflesh's health has been reduced by 20%, and the creation's Festering Rot damage has been reduced by 30%. I think that the HP nerf to Surgeon Stitchflesh is good, and I think the creation's Festering Rot damage being nerfed is good. What I think is also necessary is I think that this health of this ad needs to be reduced by 50%. And I'm not even exaggerating. It might be 75%. It might be 25% that it needs to be reduced by, but it's a lot. It has way too much HP to the point where you can't do the fight as it's intended, right? Basically, what we have on live right now is Zerg strat the boss or die. And the effects of Bloody Javelin stacking was like a big reason for that because the Bloody Javelin applies a 20% damage amp that stacked, right? And so for higher end groups, and this isn't necessarily how it works in pugs because people in pugs just do stupid shit with their spears. But in general, for higher end groups, you would triple javelin the boss and you have to zerg it before it jumps back up on the platform, or you basically have like this ad that's alive. You have like 2 ads that are alive and they're wiping you. By reducing the Festering Rot damage by 30%, this might make it to where you can actually heal through 2 ads for a little bit of time, but in general, you're not going to be able to like zerg Surgeon Stitchflesh anymore with the curing weapons and the Bloody Javelin no longer stacking. I think that this is like a step in the right direction, but I actually think that this is a buff to the boss if you were triple javelin, if you were using all 3 of the javelins on it and trying to zerg the boss in any capacity. And so that to me is a bit concerning, especially since this is one of, if not the hardest boss of the season. I see pretty much every single player complaining about this fight. A 20% health reduction is a massive reduction, but it's more or less offset by the Kyrian weapon, Bloody Javelin no longer stacking effect. Now for pugs, this might just end up being a 20% health nerf, right? Say you wiped and you didn't have any weapons on this boss anyways. Oh wow, this is great. This is just a 20% health nerf for us. But for those players who were committing all 3 javelins to this boss, it was something that this boss is ended up getting harder, and I don't know if this boss could have gotten harder. But yeah, I would be looking to nerf the ad HP by like 50%. If you want like an appropriate nerf to kind of offset the Kyrian weapons and the Bloody Javelin no longer stacking, nerf the ad HP by 50%. That way you can actually do the fight as intended and actually kill the ads, and you don't have to commit to this Zerg strat. Then you can actually spear things like you want to, like a Marth, and you could potentially even spear Blightbone as well. And you would actually have more options with what and who you're going to be spearing. Last dungeons changes we have are for the Stone Vault. And for Stone Vault, we have Skarmorax. Skarmorax's health has been reduced by 10%. Skarmorax is now stunned for 4 seconds, which was previously 2 seconds, after the fortified shell shield has been broken. And Skarmorax's crystalline eruption damage has been reduced by 15%. This is whenever you break the ads or kill the ads, the AoE damage that they do. In general, this has been the longest boss fight of the season. I think I've seen this fight go along like 5 minutes sometimes. This fight is hard, and if you don't have an enhancement shaman like soloing all of the ads and a Frosty K soloing the boss's shield, this fight's just really hard to do correctly, especially with like soaking the orbs and whatnot, and how soaking the orbs actually ends up impacting everything. And so I think that this has been one of the hardest fights of the season. And so I think that an HP reduction is actually fairly solid for this fight. What I would have liked to have seen, and I actually think that all of these changes to Skarmorax are warranted. What I think would have been a more appropriate change is if they changed the amount of ads that ended up spawning from 3 every set to 4 every, or to 2 every set, for a total of 4 as opposed to a total of 6. That would have been a better change. I think right now, only specific classes and specific comps can really get the ads killed off in time without like blowing you up. In addition to that, you know, say the ads, they spawn randomly around the room, and you know, melee comps are just gonna have a really hard time of being able to kill off those crystals in an appropriate manner, especially if they're spawning so far from the boss. You lose a lot of boss damage having to chase the ads around the room. And if you just changed it from 3 spawning every wave to 2 spawning every wave, I think this would actually go a long way for the boss. Additionally, you're able to do a bit more boss damage if you have less of those ads spawning, so maybe we wouldn't have needed the 10% HP reduction, although, again, I'm not going to complain. But I think that, you know, right boss, maybe I would have tackled it a little bit differently. I think a great change overall. I'm not going to complain about any of this. Last boss, Void Speaker Eldritch. I'm actually surprised that they're hitting this guy, or Eirik. I definitely just pronounced that word wrong. Eirik? Doesn't matter. Void Speaker's health has been reduced by 10%, and they increase the cooldown of the Entropic Reckoning. For memory, the Entropic Reckoning is the circles that drop the puddles on the ground, and so you're going to be having less ground clutter just in general. I think overall, I'm pretty happy with all these changes. I think these changes to the affixes are fairly solid. Again, they hit all the bosses that need to be tackled. I think that the only change that I'm questioning on as a whole is the Bloody Javelins, and is this going to end up being a buff to Surge and Stitchflesh? I think the answer is just like instinctively, if you were triple javelining the boss, this is going to end up being a buff to a boss that probably didn't need to be buffed. But yeah, I think the Skarmorax change is good. Void Speaker change is great. Gilded Crest now dropping from 8s. Awesome change. That's it for me today. I hope to see you guys in the later videos that I will be making. I've also been streaming a lot lately, been pushing a lot of keys. If you're into, you know, just day-to-day Mythic Plus key push content, come check out my stream. I've been, you know, again, like I've been saying, streaming a lot. So if you're into that kind of stuff, come check me out, and I will see you guys later. Goodbye.